Greg Valliere is a chief U.S. policy strategist for AGF, a global asset management firm headquartered in Toronto. Greg has followed Washington for investors for the past 40 years. No lack of change going on in that environment. Greg specializes in coverage of economic issues, taxes, and the Federal Reserve. He has held numerous positions, including Director of Research at Charles Schwab Washington Research Group. Greg is a frequent guest on CNN, Fox Business TV, Bloomberg Radio and TV, and CBS Radio News. He is frequently quoted in the Wall Street Journal, Barron's, and the Washington Post. A graduate of George Washington University, Greg and his wife Mary live in downtown Washington. Join me in welcoming Greg Valliere.
Well, thanks, Margaret. Great to be here. I have to start with a confession. When I left Washington yesterday, I told my wife, I'm a little nervous about this speech. She said, why? You do a lot of speeches. You have problems with Ukraine? I said, no, I think I understand Ukraine. She said, you have problems with the Fed? Well, I knew that Craig would do a great job on the Fed, and he did, so I'm not going to disagree with him. She said, well, are you nervous about the fall election, making a prediction? No, I'm going to tell you today what I think will happen. She said, well, why are you nervous? I said, well, I'm not sure I can tie this damn necktie. It's been a long time since I've tied one, and I see we're split about half and half. Anyway, great to be here, tie or no tie. I have a lot I want to talk about, and let me just get right to it and begin with what I think really dictates everything right now, and that, of course, is Ukraine. I have been very outspoken on TV and in print. I do a morning piece talking about how Russia cannot win this war in Ukraine by any conventional sense of the word win. I don't see that happening. I think that Putin obviously has grossly miscalculated. People who I respect feel that he has health issues. Nobody's quite sure why. But on a fairly mild spring day 2 days ago when they had the parade on May 9th, he had a very heavy wool blanket over his legs. He limped. Something's happening to him that I think complicates this entire story. So I think there's three scenarios. I mean, there's maybe more, but I would say there's three scenarios. One is that the Russians continue the slog going into more of Western Ukraine, but I doubt it. I think one of the big stories here is how incredibly inept the Russian army has been. Their air force has been decimated. They've lost now maybe as many as a dozen generals who've been killed in combat. Some people say killed by their own troops. They have an acute supply shortage that's becoming more dramatic every day. So the idea that the Russians can march further into Ukraine, to me, is quite unlikely. They, I think, are stunned in Moscow by the ineptitude of their own army and by the impact of the sanctions, which I think will lead to, in the next year or so, a depression with a D in Russia. So that's scenario number one. Scenario number two is that the Ukrainians regain the offensive. They had a very good day yesterday. They have a tremendous amount of arms from the U.S. and the West. I can be very critical about Joe Biden and the way we got out of Afghanistan, but I give Biden some credit for putting NATO together, having a unified force. And I think it's quite possible the Ukrainians can push the Russians back into the Donbass area, back to the original borders. But that's not going to be easy. And then the third scenario, the one that I think is the most intriguing, is that some terribly ambitious young general will take him out. I'm not sure how. It's not easy to get to him. He's got that desk that's about a mile long. You can't get close to him. I'd say half-jokingly that he should go out and hire the very best food tasters in the world to taste his meals before he eats, because I'm sure somebody has to be thinking in the Russian intelligence, which is not bad, in the Russian military, that this is ruinous for Russia, that this will ruin Russia for years, if not decades to come. The damage that has been inflicted on their military and on their economy. And I do think there's probably someone close to him who will take him out. Maybe they'll cite health reasons. He just turned 70. You know, maybe that could be the excuse, but I do think that's one of the scenarios. Unfortunately, I can't tell you that any of these three scenarios would lead to a rapid resolution. And as Craig said, this could go on for quite some time. And we've seen this war coincident with much higher energy prices, a genuine crisis in food and fertilizer that will affect much of the world, and I think just general uncertainty in the markets that will not subside anytime soon. I think we would be naive to expect this war to be over by the end of the summer. It could drag on even longer. But I reiterate that under the conventional terms of the word win, I cannot see the Russians winning this disastrous war that they should never have gotten involved in the first place. Well, this idea of a protracted war brings me to the next subject, which Craig touched on. I want to spend a little time as well on inflation. I am not burdened with a PhD in economics, so I'm not going to give you the economic version of what's going on, but I would say that it's two types of inflation. One is things, lumber, oil, metals, things like that can go up or down in a very volatile way. The other thing that I think is more pervasive and troublesome is the labor market, that we have seen now a pervasive shortage of workers. So let me just spend 30 seconds talking about my sister who runs a restaurant in New England. She's run out of workers. For the last year or so, she can't find waiters, waitresses, busboys, busgirls. She can't find cooks. She can't find anybody unless she goes to them and says, I'm going to give you a sign-up bonus, and I'm going to give you more than you used to be making here. And many have come back, some haven't. It's been tough for her. And what she's had to do with these higher expenses is pass these expenses on to her own customers. And you see this vicious circle that is making things very difficult for entrepreneurs, small business owners like my sister. I think with unemployment today at 3.6%, maybe even headed a little bit lower, that's going to allow inflation to persist, I think, for some time, certainly for people like my sister who have to pay much higher salaries. The Fed is obviously, very, very concerned about this. I don't think that a resolution, therefore, of inflation is going to come anytime soon. I think it's going to last for a while. But at the same time, and I think Craig and I would agree, I don't see a recession either. I think that you would have to be aware of the enormous amount of stimulus still in the system in the U.S. Do you realize that last year we spent close to $6 trillion on infrastructure, on COVID relief, and much of that money hasn't been spent? The example I always cite is California, where they are looking at this year a surplus of $80 billion. Now, being Californians, they'll find a way to spend it, no question about that. One of the ironies here is that Jerry Brown, who was always viewed as kind of a kook, believed in a rainy day fund. Jerry Brown had a huge rainy day fund that helped California. I think they're going to be more inclined to spend it. But there are other areas as well. Other states, individuals still have money that they haven't spent. And I think that's going to be a reason, plus low unemployment, why the economy can get through the next few quarters without any kind of a big economic problem. I would say, though, clearly this issue of inflation has become an enormous political albatross for Joe Biden. So I want to talk a little bit about politics. I would just preface it by saying I'm pretty much in the middle of the road. I don't come here as an advocate. I think I'm a cynic more than anything else after doing this for so many years. And I would say for Biden, the big problem is a growing perception among Americans that we spent too much money. That $5 to $6 trillion in money spent last year is associated by most people with inflation. People feel that it is exacerbated, at the very least, an inflation problem. People also feel that Biden has not understood the energy industry. Being so hostile to fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas, I think has not helped him either. People associate high gasoline prices with his energy policies. So he's in a difficult spot. And let me tell you, I think there are two big political stories right now in Washington. The first is the growing likelihood that Congress will flip back to the Republicans. I think the House is a pretty easy call. The Republicans only need 5 seats to regain the House. History shows that every first-term president in his first midterm election usually loses between 20 and 30 seats. Maybe the Republicans have already picked up some low-hanging fruit. Maybe it's only 20 seats that they're likely to get. But when you combine this historical factor with redistricting, which is a big deal in many states, in Texas and Florida, Republicans will get more seats. When you combine it with the president's very low job approval rating on a wide range of issues, not just inflation, urban crime, illegal immigration, the list goes, Hunter Biden, the list goes on things that I think are going to hurt him in this upcoming election. So I'm perfectly comfortable saying the Republicans pick up at least 20 seats in the House, and I'm on the low side. I have a lot of friends who are political analysts who feel the number could even be higher. So that's the first big political story coming. And obviously, it only takes one House to pretty much scuttle the Biden agenda. The Senate is a tougher call. A lot of states still haven't become clear, like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. We'll get a big primary next Tuesday night in Pennsylvania, where out of nowhere, a very conservative African-American Trump conservative could be moving up on Dr. Oz and a hedge fund manager. That's going to be a fun race to watch on Tuesday night. So I'm not quite ready to make a call in the Senate, but I am ready to say the House, in all likelihood, will flip. Well, what's the second big story in Washington politically? I think, fearless forecast, if I'm lucky enough to be back here in 2 or 3 years, you can call me on it. Fearless forecast, I do not think Joe Biden is running for re-election. I think it's unlikely. I've talked to Democrats who say, well, of course he has to say he's running. Once he says he's not, he's a lame duck. So he will say that. But I increasingly think that he's not going to run, especially after the Democrats take a shellacking in the November election. Well, why is this? Well, part of it is that his agenda has stalled. I'll never understand, and I have a lot of good friends who agree, will never quite understand why Biden, after running as a moderate, affiliated himself with the progressives and their agenda, which failed entirely. Defund the police, new tax increases, Medicare for all, let's have more Supreme Court seats, on and on and on. The progressive agenda failed, yet Biden aligned himself with it. And I think it was a fundamental miscalculation by him. The other issue, very delicate issue, but I have to raise it because a lot of people are, and that is his age and his health. I've known Joe Biden for 50 years, and I think he's lost a mile or two off of his fastball. He always has had a stuttering problem, and it's not his fault if he has a stuttering problem. But I think on a lot of issues, he's not maybe quite as sharp as he used to be. I have friends who work at the White House who hear him talk in meetings and say, he's pretty sharp, he's on top of all of these issues. But you have to remember one number, and that is, if he should win a second term, he would be leaving the White House at the age of 86. I think that's too old, and I think most Americans would agree that it's too old in both parties. Mitch McConnell's 80, Dianne Feinstein's 88, Grassley's 87 or 88. The list goes on and on. But if you're the President of the United States, I think this is going to become an increasing issue. Many of the Republicans I talk to, like Mitch McConnell, are saying, let's run out the clock here. Let's not make this about Biden's cognitive abilities or abortion or anything else. Let's keep our heads down, try not to make mistakes, and we'll pick up Congress. And I think that's quite likely. So if I'm right, if Joe Biden is not going to run for a second term, who's out there? Well, I think most people in Washington who I respect in both parties would agree that Kamala Harris has not been particularly impressive. I think that there's a dozen or so Democrats who are itching to run, long list. We'd be here until 2 in the afternoon talking about all the people who might run, but it certainly would not be a layup for Kamala Harris. There would be a lot of people involved in this race. And then there's the Republican side. I happen to feel, and I need odds on this, but I'm not certain Trump's going to run for a second term. I would note that he does not appear to go to the gym with any regularity. I'm not sure what kind of physical shape he's in. He faces some legal issues, as we all know, but he's pretty good at wiggling out of legal issues by claiming it's fake news or a witch hunt, whatever. But I'm not sure Trump's going to run. I mean, right now the betting is that he will. Let's see how his endorsements go, starting on Tuesday night in Pennsylvania. If Dr. Oz loses, that would be a sign to many Republicans that Trump may not be quite as powerful as he has been for the last year or so. The jury's still out on that. If he doesn't run, first of all, there could be 4 candidates from one state: Florida, Trump, Rubio, DeSantis, and who am I forgetting? Oh, Scott, who's been very critical of Biden lately. So you could see 4 people from Florida. You could see a very prominent Republican from this state possibly running. As the old joke is, any man who loses 50 pounds at this age is either running for office or is having an affair. So I would assume Mike Pompeo is running for office. So I do think that he'll be in the mix. And the list is endless. Again, we could be here until 2 o'clock. Nikki Haley, long list. Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, a long list of Republicans are itching to run. Probably DeSantis is the most eager to run, and I think he's somebody who will someday be the nominee. So a lot of uncertainty politically to go along with all the uncertainties we have with the economy and the markets, things like that. Let me just finish up with 2 or 3 other themes that I wanted to get in this morning in all of the stuff that's going on. I think since the next Congress will be inclined to spend less money, and this Congress has stalled, the chances of getting much more on Build Back Better have slipped dramatically. Maybe you'll get a little bit on child care, a little bit on environmental stuff, but I think there will not be another spending bill. And if that's true, there will not be an accompanying tax increase. The rationale for a tax increase was, well, we got to do this because to pay for Build Back Better. Well, if there's no Build Back Better, there's not going to be much on taxes. And I would tell all of you, I tell everybody in the investment world, that chances have dropped dramatically to get an estate tax increase, to raise the capital gains rate, to monkey around with a step-up basis. I don't totally rule out an increase of 1 or 2 percentage points on the very wealthy, or 1 or 2 percentage points on very profitable corporations, but that train is about to leave the station. I'm not sure there's going to be time, since Congress has a proclivity for taking lots of vacations, including 6 weeks in late July into early September. There may not be anything on taxes. So, and if the Republicans do take the House, there won't be anything on taxes for the next 2 years. So I think as you're planning, and I've gotten this question now for over a year, I'm planning my retirement, I'm planning what tax changes may come. I'm beginning to think the answer is there aren't any big changes coming because there won't be a consensus on the legislation. A couple of other things real quickly. You know, we have spent so much time talking about Ukraine and Putin and NATO that we have maybe not focused quite enough on an equally serious threat, and that, of course, is China. If you talk to people in Washington, there is a consensus in both parties that China is a bad actor, a bad player. And you get this from Democrats and Republicans. The way China treats its dissidents, the way China has spied on U.S. firms, the way China has been not transparent on COVID. Nobody really knows if it came out of a lab in Wuhan. The Chinese have not been transparent at all. The way China talks about Taiwan and all their new weapons, like hypersonic missiles, this has made most people in Washington deeply suspicious of China. And I think there's a chance that there would be legislation that would give U.S. manufacturers more money to compete directly with China in manufacturing of medical products, things like that. So I would like to say we're getting closer to some kind of an agreement or a truce with China. But I don't see it. I think that Washington will continue to be deeply suspicious, and Pompeo would probably be one of the leaders of that attitude. Final thing I'd mention on policy is just to say that the sleeper issue, not a lot of sex appeal, so I'll only give it 30 seconds. The sleeper issue is regulatory policy, which is very aggressive. In my career, I have rarely seen regulatory policy this assertive on antitrust, against fossil fuels, in favor of regulation of drug prices, which polls very well. But right across the board, you see a regulatory climate that I would argue is increasingly adversarial toward business. I think that's probably not a good story. I would just finish by saying, as always, like the wall of worry, everything in my world is something that you can get concerned about, lose sleep over. We can't lose track of the main story, and that is that COVID is pretty much done. Maybe not in Shanghai, where these draconian policies, I think, have been overkill, but I think here in the US and around the world, maybe you could get it, but maybe it would just be like a mild flu. You look at hospitalization and fatalities, the numbers are way down. I think we've turned a corner there. We've done it without going into any kind of a deep recession. I don't think, as I said earlier, we will have a deep recession. But I would conclude by saying that we cannot get an all-clear signal on the climate for investors until we resolve Ukraine. And unfortunately, I fear that's not imminent. So I'm going to stop there. Love to take questions, or do we introduce another? Oh, questions. All right, great. This is my favorite part. I love to take questions, and fire away. Yes, sir. Great question, and I don't know the answer. The question was, who leaked the abortion document that was written by Alito? Nobody knows. Was it a Democrat? Was it a staffer? A clerk at the Supreme Court? I don't think anybody knows who did it, but it's not fake. I mean, it was a legitimate document. And I think that, I've talked to McConnell's people, and they view it as a mixed blessing. They, frankly, would prefer not to deal with the issue between now and the election, because it's so emotional, it's such an explosive issue that it might not help the party at all. But I do think it will be a big factor in energizing the base for the Democrats. I'd say at the margin, it's a reason for me to think the Democrats could just barely hold on to the Senate. Because you look at a state like New Hampshire, I'm a native of New Hampshire, Maggie Hassan was going to face a really tough race, but she's quite liberal on abortion. I think this helps her in New Hampshire. It might help Democrats in other states. But it will be, for some people, obviously, the only issue that matters. But I'd say for the population in general, inflation is a bigger deal right now. The fact that it costs $100 to fill your gas tank, I think, is the bigger issue. Other questions? Yes, sir.
If we ever get this Ukraine business settled,
Mm-hmm.
is there any way, or you might see that Putin evidently has billions of dollars stashed away outside of Russia, that
Yep.
the world could get access to that to help rebuild Ukraine?
Well, it'll get rebuilt pretty quickly, I think. Maybe in 2, 3, 4 years. It'll take a while. Many of his assets have now been confiscated, not just the yachts from oligarchs, but many of the Russian assets have been confiscated. It raises an interesting issue. Eventually there will be a truce. I can't tell you if it's next month or next year, but eventually there'll be a truce. How do they deal with this issue of sanctions? Can you just turn them on and off like a light switch? I don't think so. The sanctions against Russia are so harsh that it could take quite some time for them to recover. That's why I said earlier, I think the Russian intelligence community and the military community are aghast at how he has miscalculated and how it's going to take a while to bring the country back together again. But yes, confiscating more assets is definitely on the table as an option, no question. Yes, sir.
You see the tariffs coming off, the China tariffs coming off, and why do you think the Biden administration has kept them on for as long as they have? And I got another question.
Yeah, well, as I'm sure you know, earlier this week there was a trial balloon that the U.S. might consider lifting some of the Chinese tariffs. I think the key here is whether the Chinese are still overtly aiding Russia. I would say the answer is yes, they are. I think that the U.S. is in no hurry. I talked to someone before I flew out here who said Biden deep down in might think that easing up on China tariffs makes some sense, but it would hurt him politically. With Washington so united against China, if Biden did this, it would reinforce a belief that he's soft on China, and his son has had dealings with China. It would give the Republicans still another issue. So I think it's unlikely that Biden would lift these sanctions right now on China because of the blowback he would get. You had another question?
My other question was on Joe Manchin. Did the Biden administration just miscalculate him completely? And what do you see his role in the Democratic Party?
What a great question. So the question, if you didn't hear it in the corner, involved Joe Manchin. And the White House thought that they could persuade him, flatter him, and it failed. And I think that if I ever have time to write a book about Washington, it'll be about hubris, the impact of hubris. And I think that the Biden administration thought that they could persuade Manchin, and they failed. And they thought they could get this huge agenda done with a margin of 1 seat in the Senate and about 5 seats in the House. Well, the reason FDR and Lyndon Johnson got enormous stuff done is that they had phenomenal majorities in both houses. Biden never had that, and he thought he could persuade Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema into giving him what he wanted. I don't know him well. I've met him a few times, but people who know him feel that he has outsmarted a lot of the Biden people and is highly unlikely in a state as conservative as West Virginia to change. They're talking right now, I didn't mention this, I should spend 1 minute on it. Manchin and moderates are talking about an energy bill that would provide for more drilling and exploration and use of fossil fuels. And being from West Virginia, he's very much inclined to do that. But I think that they have miscalculated him by a lot. And he's pretty wily, he's a pretty clever guy, and I think that they feel betrayed by him. They've said it publicly, but politics is a rough business. Biden feels that he's not getting enough credit for a low unemployment rate. That could be, but no one ever said politics is fair. Other questions? I don't know how much time, if I got a couple more? Yes? Good question. If you didn't hear it in the corners, is this administration motivated to grant more concessions to Iran to get a nuclear deal? It's a tough one because the Israelis are leery of any kind of deal with the Iranians, who continue to be provocative in the Persian Gulf, hitting Israeli tankers. But at the same time, the Israelis, who have great intelligence, feel that Iran is only a few months away from developing a crude nuclear bomb. I don't know, I'm not quite sure how they deliver it. That still is an issue. But if Iran's got a crude nuclear bomb by the end of the summer, you got to pay attention. I mean, that's something that could be really horrifying. So there are people who feel we could still get a deal. My sense in the last few weeks is that we probably still are stalled, and I'm not sure Joe Biden wants to proclaim right ahead of the fall elections that we're going to have a nuclear deal with the Iranians. I think his political calculus would be it would hurt the party. Other questions? I saw another hand, I thought. Yes?
What is the Finland-Sweden joining NATO thing due to Putin? Does all this stuff make them more?
Yeah, Finland and Sweden may be joining NATO. Yeah, I think it makes Putin feel even more desperate. I did not want to use the worst word, that's nuclear, before you this morning, because I'm not sure that Putin is prepared to do that. More importantly, I'm not sure his generals are prepared to do that. Tactical nuclear weapons on the battlefield could blow back, literally, on Russian troops, and I'm not sure Russian generals would want to see that happen. But I think Putin is prepared to use a lot more potent weapons over the next few months. But at the same time, a lot of weapons are gone. That parade in Moscow a couple of days ago, they're down about 25% on tanks, military vehicles, helicopters. So this could make him more irrational. It is a concern. And I've talked to people who feel, as I do, that some eager young general will take him out. The issue is, could we get somebody worse? You know, that's something we got to worry about as well. Well, you have been a great audience. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you very much.